that we discussed this morning. Thank you again for joining us. Dr. Postlewaite?
Thanks, Erica. Good morning, everyone. Maggie, if you could go ahead and put the slides up. We sent them ahead of time, but I know that it will help us to look at them on the screen for those of you who don't have ready access as you are joining us this morning. The first slide, we can skip. It just simply identifies who we are and what we're hoping to accomplish as a team, and that is a restart as quickly as possible for as many students as possible. We want to limit our conversation with you this morning in order to give you an opportunity to provide more feedback to us. We'll quickly show you the highlights from the Accelerate Ed recommendations. We will then turn to reviewing our school restart plan components. What we try to do, we have pages and pages, 100 pages of different details from different departments, but Erica and Edward tried to boil these down to just a few slides that we will highlight this morning in the areas of the recovery and continuity of learning, the logistical considerations and business practices, and give you a chance on those highlighted items to provide your ideas and suggestions. Then we will tell you how you can become more involved to give more direct feedback should you like, and take specific questions that you might have about where to go next. So if we could advance to the next slide. Just a reminder that we're aligning with the state Accelerate Ed recommendations. There are strong recommendations, but not requirements. The Senate and House, the General Assembly yesterday passed the recommendations coming from the State Accelerate South Carolina Committee. They provided funding for 5 additional days for children in grades K through 8. Those days need to be placed on the beginning of the school year. They also provided funding for summer programming for children, but that programming must be delivered face-to-face. If it's not delivered face-to-face, we will not be reimbursed for it. We're also looking at the Chamber's Reignite report, their safe opening report, and we are collaborating with MUSC on their back to business in a version of the back to school plan that helps us make sure that the practices and procedures we've implemented are best practice. So next slide simply shows you the review of the South Carolina Accelerate Ed report, and the link at the bottom will take you to the entire report if you would like to see it at least on Monday. And the next slide with each of these bullets tells you the sections of their strong recommendations in phase 1 to get started. Yesterday, DHEC released their ratings of every county with respect to whether we are at high risk, medium risk, or low risk. MUSC has also had a version of metrics on their webpage for several months. They updated every week. DHEC will update theirs every week. Right now, Charleston is rated high in our percent of COVID cases per 100,000 population. We're rated high in our percent of COVID-19 positive results for those who are getting tested, and we're rated high in the increase, the trend in the increase of cases. So because we had those high ratings, we pulled back from our recommendation to the board that our students in grades K through 8 start those additional 5 days that the state is giving us on August 11th. Right now, the scheduled start date for all of our students is August 18th, with the understanding that the first 5 days for K-8 students will be funded by the state and actually add 5 days to their school years. So we have to reconcile that yet. The state recommendations then quickly, we've already implemented all the rest of these things. The task force, surveying staff, surveying parents. We've done that once. We've sent out another survey this morning, looking at what we can do to provide social, emotional, and mental health supports, looking at our areas that don't have broadband services, thinking about how to get connectivity for all of our children, And then, of course, developing policies so that we can run our own virtual school. So all those things you'll hear more about this morning. We're right in line with the state recommendations. The next page is simply the cover page of the report, and we're going to move right into the following page, just a couple of general things. The first is the school start date in August, and I've already mentioned that we'll plan to start on August 18th. For grades K-8, those will be the 5 additional days, but we'll also start our high school students that on those days, if it's safe to do so. We have to look at conditions and find out in particular whether that trend, that upward trend we're seeing, has begun a downward slope. If it has not, we are in jeopardy of not being able to open on a traditional schedule, and we'll have to revert to online school again for everyone. So do you want to say a little bit more about that? This is Carolyn Belcher, our Chief Academic Officer.
I think only to ask the group for feedback on what might make the most sense for families. Like, as we look at this, we're required by the state right now to fit in those additional 5 days of instruction prior to the end of the calendar year, December 31st. That would mean probably breaking into some holidays in order to cover it, or reaching out to the state to see if there's an option of adding it on the back end, which is unclear right now. So curious if families, particularly on this call, have a strong point of view on what might work for them. Again, this is trying to figure out how we're going to maximize and well use those additional 5 instructional days for K-8.
So if you have any ideas about where we would place 5 more days for children in K through 8.
Dr. Postaway, this is Kate Darby. Do we have to, because I've had some feedback from parents on this one, they have to be 5 consecutive days, or can we put them in different places?
We can put them in any place we'd like. We're required to deliver 180 instructional days, and we have a lot of ability about where to put them and how to deliver them, frankly.
I've gotten some feedback from parents and secondary feedback from parents, from teachers, just encourage, supportive of the 5 days, but hoping that we could do it at a different time, because I think lots of people are hoping to do what they can do of a summer vacation right before school starts. So I've had a couple people suggest, doing it during some of the Thanksgiving holiday, or spreading it out over the year. Personally, I don't think adding it at the end of the year, I think that'd be tough, but you guys can make anything work. But that is one bit of feedback I've gotten from people, is they'd rather see it spread out.
Thank you. Very helpful.
Hi, this is Melissa Reese, teacher out at Frierson. Is there an option to change some of the teacher work days into school days, and then to tack the work days on to the end of the year? It's not ideal, but
I think that is an option, Melissa. Thank you for the suggestion. I think the challenge, of course, is that we'd like to use the teacher work days for professional development and wrapping up the semesters. But if that's the best option, I get it.
This is Meg Orchard here. We do have a little bit of flexibility in October when we initially had family data conferences, which are usually a great tool to communicate with parents. But in the absence of testing from last year, I don't know how valuable those could be in this current year with the data we'll have to share with parents. So perhaps that's an opportunity to rethink that day. It does get tricky in November because we have a required election day off. So this particular fall is really tight. So if we could extend some of those 5 days into spring, that might be ideal if we get permission.
Thank you. It causes me to think that although we have to be off on election day, it's possible, depending on how it falls, that could be a paid teacher workday for teachers in grades K through 8. If we do follow the suggestion to convert one of the workday instructional day, that would be a place where we could place a teacher workday. And our systems are set up now so that teachers could work virtually on election day to keep them safe. Any other ideas about the 5 additional days for K-8?
Yeah, this is Paul Asper, parent of a rising second grader and kindergartner. I guess my question is maybe bigger than the 5 days, and whether it's sort of around this in the context of, I think some of our goals are, one, how do we catch students back up to the extent that they have fallen behind? 2, how do we maximize learning time in this really interesting and challenging environment? And then 3, how do we, keep students as on track as we can? I guess with those kind of objectives in mind, have we looked at anything a little more ambitious than just adding 5 days? Have we looked at, would we experiment with maybe year-round school or extended days, or something that's maybe much more ambitious than just adding the 5 days, to the extent that the district even had the latitude to do that?
Sure, I think, yeah, I would love that. We should, if we can move away from the classic agrarian calendar, that would be a dream come true for this chief academic officer. I think the challenge is a financial one. Obviously, to cover the cost of teachers over the period of that time is, at this point, cost prohibitive, particularly given the larger economic climate of the community. But I think the opportunity here, and we'll talk more about this, I think, on subsequent calls, since this one is very much about safety and the key priorities that we're considering to launch well, is how do we do that accelerating of instruction rather than just remediation, given we've had a real gap in learning for the final quarter for all students. So there are a few different things we're thinking about. One is, where are there options for extended day or Saturday school, particularly for kids who need it the most? Are there curricular tools that would lend themselves more easily to a combination of virtual and in-person instruction? I think we did a decent job in accommodating what was an unexpected experience in the spring, but now knowing and having time to plan, how do we make sure that we're really making sure that instruction has a nice scope and sequence day over day? And then I think there is just in general, we need to make a shift, and I think a lot of districts do, from a remediation and intervention to acceleration. And that sounds a lot easier than it is. Like, to really think about making sure that kids are exposed to grade level content, even though they missed some of the previous grade, and getting real-time instruction to bridge that gap. So that's a massive professional development undertaking that we want to make sure that we're thinking through and doing well, and making sure that we're being reasonable on teachers who've also had to go through a traumatic time. So looking forward to sort of sharing our thoughts and getting your input on subsequent calls so you have a better sense of how we're thinking about that.
Thank you.
Good morning.
I had a question. Sorry.
Good morning, Paul. My name is Mev McIntosh. I'm a high school ELA teacher. And just in response to your question, I'd like to make a suggestion and provide a thought here from a teacher's perspective. Just recently, Georgia has decided to waive its standardized testing throughout the state. And I know there are a number of teachers here on this call who can also share their thoughts, but just to summarize, the amount of time that we have, for lack of better words, some compromised instruction within our classroom is usually around standardized testing time. And I hear exactly what you're saying. I have an 8-year-old daughter who's going into 4th grade next year. I'm very concerned about how her math skills are going to look from March to the fall. So one thing that I'm looking at from a teacher's perspective is, how can we make sure that our testing is as accurate, valid, and helpful to both teachers and students as possible? And I know from my experience, the amount of time that my own faculty and staff and myself, we have to spend to prepare for the testing that takes place in the schools leads to some compromised time with instruction. So to answer your question, I agree with you. 5 days is not going to be enough to catch up our kids, especially in a Title I school where I teach. But with that being said, if we can look at this is an opportunity to maybe reconsider, will the standardized test be ample information and reliable information, considering what our students have gone through this past year, and how can we work with the state and the federal government to make that request if that's what the school district would like to do.
And maybe I think we're going to come back on the assessment in subsequent calls, given that's a key piece of our strategy. In South Carolina, the legislature right now is considering suspending standardized tests. I think the one challenge that I would want lots of teachers and principals to engage in is we really do need to know where we are. And over the last few years, it's been so hard with so many different changes within the state around which test are we using and which standards are we using, that I'm worried about another apples to oranges to bananas trying in this time of crisis. And there may be some advantage to making sure that we're trying to have some continuity, but I think that's a decision that this committee, as well as the teachers and principals across the districts, really need to weigh in on. And we do plan on spending much more time on that in subsequent calls. Is it okay if I transition, Dr. Postaway, to a conversation maybe about what we're thinking around school reopening? I'm going to hand this off in a moment to Dr. Williams, who leads the secondary schools, and Ms. Simmons, who leads all of our elementary schools across the system. I think the headline here is, prior to the spike in increased amounts of virus right now, we really wanted to make sure that we had as many possible kids safely returning to school. So principals have done a lot of work to figure out what that means for their particular buildings. Dr. Williams and Ms. Simmons, can I turn it over to you?
Absolutely. Great morning, everyone. Callan's absolutely correct in that we actually task our principals with, looking at their building capacity, looking at their staffing, and thinking creatively, not like they traditionally think about if you could, given the current circumstances, if you could bring back a total amount of scholars, what would that percentage be safely? So principals did some things like looking at their cafeterias, looking at their media centers, looking at extra meeting rooms they had, and how those could possibly be turned into learning centers. Also, again, looking at their staffing and thinking through, am I using every single person on my staff as creatively as I could? Is someone dual certified that could teach multiple classes throughout the day? So principals turned those plans in on yesterday. Myself, along with Michelle Simmons and her directors and the executive directors that work under me, kind of went through those plans yesterday and last night, and we have some type of analysis of where each school is, and we're very proud to say that every school that we looked at thus far has done a great job in thinking creatively and how we could actually bring a certain percentage of scholars into our buildings daily that would want that face-to-face or need that face-to-face instruction. And I also want to point out that as a part of that analysis, we did consider what we consider to be our stable group of scholars, and those would be our scholars that we know, despite the fact that all of our kiddos have some learning loss that we need to make up for, but these kiddos were probably already behind before we started that extended school closure, so we had to pay specific attention to them. So they did look at that group as the stable group, as being that group that despite, if we had to, I'm going to state again, if we had to go to some type of hybrid schedule, like maybe an A-day, B-day, those kiddos would still have to come back every single day. So that's briefly what's been happening as a part of that safe school restart analysis that has been conducted by schools. And like I said, we have a preliminary analysis for each school, and we're very proud to say that they all really thought through that and really were creative and innovative in that process. Any questions about that anyone may have?
Thank you for that, Dr. Williams. And the only additional item I'll offer.
I do have one question for, excuse me, Ms. Simmons, for Dr. Williams.
Yes, sir.
So in the preparation plan for the high school, I know that the plan was globally on how to bring kids back in the classroom, but we have special ed kids or areas of concerns of those nature who are really confined to one class per se. And so how are we dealing with our special needs kids or special needs area?
That group of kiddos, sir, would be in that stable group that I mentioned. And I should have been more specific. So the stable group of kids that need to come back daily would include our EC scholars, which would be special education, Reverend Mack, but also we're looking at our ELL, and we're also looking at our kids that may already be below the 20th percentile as well, that have some learning gaps. So they would be in that stable group that we're looking at coming back every day in every building, sir.
Okay, all right, thank you.
And what I was going to add on to Dr. Williams' comments regarding how schools can attempt to serve the most students in their, knowing that Jeff Baroyan, the operation they've given us the outline of about how many boys and girls can sit in a bus. And so transportation barriers have to be considered as well. And so we are encouraging schools and school teams to really think about working with families to determine bus capacity, how we can support one another in terms of families supporting one another, dropping students off, or who can be a car rider, who's in walking distance. So looking at our walkers, our car riders, and our bus riders in a way where we can really capture who can ride the bus, who has an alternate form of transportation, to make sure everybody's as safe as possible as we re-engage at the building level. Thank you for that opportunity, Carolyn, to just talk a little bit about what school buildings and school principals are tasked with at this time as we think about restart.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide. It continues the conversation, recovery and continuity of learning. Carolyn?
Sure. I think one of our challenge is, as folks can probably infer, is that when we have a building where we are unable, despite a lot of efforts, either because the school is already at capacity or just the way the physical space is organized, to have all the children come back, what do we do to, how do we schedule our time? And I think probably folks have seen a lot of this nationally as a lot of districts are grappling this. We asked a team of principals across the district to come together at multiple grade levels, had some charter school representatives to come up with different ideas on how to make this work. And they came up with a few different options, an alternating schedule of an A or B day. There's a possibility of an AA, BB day, and then alternating weeks. So one group of kids would be in the school from Monday to Friday, and another group of kids is doing virtual instruction Monday to Friday. And I think one of our questions is, how do we think about those alternating schedules? We know that it's important that feeder patterns are aligned, because if you have multiple children in the household, you want to make sure your kids are going to school on the same days so you can make childcare arrangements on different days, if that makes sense. So in D2, that the Cario, Laurel Hill, Pinckney, Carolina Park schools are all thinking together about what that actually means. But I think one of our questions is, should it actually be about the entire district that we have a more centralized approach to this? In part because that would eliminate some complexity around magnet schools or school choice options. It would also make sure that every day we all know what day a certain group of kids are going to school. But it might also limit some flexibility in certain feeder patterns that might have more options or be able to experiment with different things. So curious to hear if there's a strong reaction on whether we should be having a centralized approach to an alternating schedule, or allow feeder patterns to come up with what they think is best. I'm particularly interested to hear from parents who would have to accommodate the days when students were not physically in school.
Good morning. This is Tiffany Bush, representing parents. I have a 5-year-old and a 12-year-old. My concern about A day and B day, if a child was to come to school infected with the virus and have been around somebody that had the virus, what happens to that pattern of A day, B day?
I think we're going to have, I will ask Ellen Nitz, our head of school nursing, to jump in here to make sure that I'm answering this correctly. But we're going to have, if we do have infections, we'll have to respond to those at a school site basis. So make sure that we're closing a particular school or classroom, and then maybe adjust that schedule accordingly. It would not necessarily be a system-wide change. We would obviously try very hard to maximize instruction, and it may only affect a classroom, ma'am, depending on the extent to which the student or other adults were exposed to the virus. But Ellen, are there more things to add to that I'm not thinking about?
So we, just a few things. So we are working in conjunction with DHEC at the school level, because DHEC, of course, is being overwhelmed by the number of cases that they are trying to manage at this point. And very often, you know, we receive information and I'm able to do the contact tracing, you know, that same day. So what we are able to do is prevent any further spread of transmission by being able to make those phone calls and do an investigation and have people either follow an isolation or a quarantine, depending upon what the DHEC guidance, you know, lets us do. So, and from there, we would do the same thing. We would follow DHEC guidance on what that means to the school or to the classroom.
Hey, can I comment on that real quick? And just a caveat on that, Ellen, that's only if they sign the waiver authorizing you to be notified, right?
Well, that would be correct if they had been tested, but right now, for instance, we may have someone in the school setting that would say that they have found out that their spouse is positive, and they have provided that information to administration. Administration then follows up and fills out a form that is sent to me, and I call the person and do an investigation following DHEC protocol. But if we do have testing, Jeff is correct in saying that, you know, if it's an employee, they have to sign a waiver, and then I'm able to follow up with those employees as well on on how to isolate correctly.
Thank you.
We're kind of a pre-step to DHEC, making sure that we're addressing the issues as quickly as possible to prevent further transmission.
And Ms. Bush, we're going to come in further in the presentation to go through more safety protocols, which might make you feel more comfortable as you see how we're thinking about keeping kids at a distance if they are physically present in school. Do you have a strong reaction to the alternating schedules or the alternating weeks, ma'am? As you think about your own kids?
Not particularly. I think in our household, we kind of know what we're going to do, which is strictly virtual, whether it's through CCSD or some kind of homeschooling program. My husband is a worker in the hospital. He goes to work every day. And this week, not in my immediate house, but my immediate family, we have had a COVID case, and we had to figure out how to manage it. And it doesn't really it doesn't really impact you until it comes home. And thinking A day, B day, you know, somebody being exposed to the virus, and the kids now having to go virtual because somebody in their class was, you know, identified as either being infected or around somebody that was infected. So I just think that the A day, B day, I mean, I don't know how manageable that will be or how realistic, because then you'll have the kids off of a schedule if they have to be quarantined for 14 days. And that's where we are now, quarantined for 14 days.
Appreciate that context. It's helpful.
So I have a comment. Sorry. Willie, you can go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Heather. This is Willa Hobbs. I don't have young children in the system, but I'm just thinking about the importance of continuity for especially our younger scholars. And when I think about an alternating week, I can imagine in my head just how long it's going to take the children to get used to back into school again. By the time Wednesday rolls around, you're finally back into the routine of things, and then they're going to be gone again really soon. So I'm just thinking about the population where I teach, and I think I can see the benefit of having A-B days or AAB days. That's what I was
thinking. If I can add one piece to that, Carolyn, and I like I said, as a part of that stable group, ma'am, our elementary schools are looking at possibly the K through 2 being a part of that group, and they would come every day for the purpose that you just stated, ma'am. So,
Ms. Burke?
Yes, this is Heather Burke. I'm a parent of a rising 4th grader, and I'm also a teacher at Stono Park Elementary. But I was just thinking about the A day, B day, and I feel like it's easier as a parent if things are consistent. If things are constantly changing every week as far as finding childcare when they're not at school, it's more difficult when it's always different. So the more the district could be consistent with that, I think it would be helpful to parents as well as teachers as well, having their students in school. But if a child also, as far as continuity across the district, my concern as a parent is if you have a child who goes to a magnet school and then you have a child who is in their home school as well, and having different parts of the district do different things could be very confusing for parents, or, you know, hard to deal with different schedules going on. So that was just my thought on that. I feel like more consistency would be easier for people to deal with, whatever has to happen.
Makes sense.
I would just like to make a comment on the AB alternating schedules. I teach at a Title I school where most of our students do qualify for that subgroup that Dr. Williams has been mentioning. We have a higher percentage of EC students. We have a higher percentage of ELLs. We have that percentage of students who are below the 20th percentile. And so one thing that we've been discussing as faculty and staff members is that, again, going back to the continuity, this would be a difficult schedule for our students that we serve to consistently maintain. And we do like the idea of looking at the feeder patterns to determine what would work out best for our area. And just so you can identify the area in which I'm at North Charleston High School. So so we have received feedback, and I've shared that with the superintendent and Ms. Taylor. But a number of our teachers have said the AB schedule would be very challenging for the population we serve.
Mr. Johnson, you were going to speak, I think.
On me.
That's very helpful. I think also, I think it highlights our dilemma as we try to figure out how best to balance what's right for as many kids and families as we can, because we know this is a hardship on families who've been put in the position of having to balance responsibilities in the way that Ms. Bush was talking about earlier, of sick relatives at home, childcare, and educating their children. And we obviously want as many kids back as safely as possible, as quickly as possible, and trying to negotiate what's going to be as easy as possible on families in this time is not easy. So appreciate your insight and look forward to continuing the conversation. I think you can see that there's not an easy consensus that emerges on this as we start to talk about it. If it's okay with you, Dr. Postlewaite, I'll jump over just to make sure that we're sharing some information on the K-12 virtual school. So we are planning to put together a unique K-12 virtual school. I want to be explicit with parents on this call and across the community that this will be different than what we did in the spring. In the spring, schools led virtual instruction as a support for their communities, and individual students worked with their teachers, and there was a blended model. With the K-12 virtual school, we've been looking across the country to actually purchase courses that are already tested as a virtual online medium, and we would adjust them for South Carolina context and do a combination of teachers that we would hire for the virtual school, supporting students, particularly in K-5 during small group instruction. It does allow opportunities for families to sign in at different points to take aspects of the course at the time that works for their family, and then have some direct instruction from teachers at a steady time over the course of the course. We're going to do that particularly for K-5. We're looking at an outside vendor, and for middle school and high school, we're lucky in South Carolina that there's a robust virtual course catalog from the state that is aligned to the state standards and Carnegie units. It's already in place, and we have a subscription with Edgenuity that helps allow us to offer AP courses and extended courses as well. So the K-12 school is designed for those families who think it isn't the right time to send their children back to school, We would, right now, our plan is to allow magnet or school choice families to maintain their position in their current school. So when they do feel like it's safe, they can send their child back to school. But I want to make sure that I'm being explicit. It will be run by a distinct faculty and not necessarily connected to the homeschool, although the child will still be enrolled in their homeschool, so receive counseling from that school and support services from that school. Questions about what we're thinking about for the K-12 virtual model?
Melissa Reese, my only question that kind of goes with this and just kind of this whole topic is the students that we know that have been most at risk tend to also be the parents we're not getting a hold of. And I just want to make sure that there's some sort of plan to reach out to those families directly to make sure that they're aware of these different options, because they might not know that there's a parent survey if they're not going on the website and things like that. So just to also not just look at our students not having access, but parents who might not also have the access as well to vocalize and advocate for their kids.
I appreciate that. And I know that we wanted to centralize some of the survey processes to make sure that we were getting information quickly and to lighten the burden on school faculties, particularly given a lot of adults are not in the building right now who are not 240-day employees. So we're down to a modest faculty at this point. But the aim is to make sure the principals and folks on the school site who know the families the best can reach out and try to make individual personalized contact. And if that doesn't work, similar to the spring, we would pull in additional resources with Jennifer Coker's team, who's going to speak shortly, in alternative programs, and make sure that families get the help that they need.
Meg Orchard here. I have a quick clarifying question. If a family chooses the virtual route and then we make some strides in the COVID outbreak, what's the process for them perhaps choosing to transfer back into the school environment, and how are we going to gauge class sizes, et cetera, that have been built around those that are in the physical environment?
It's a good question, Meg, which is part of the reason it's so important for us to survey families to know exactly how many families are interested, because it's not probably going to be nice and neat that we have the same percentage across every school building. Some schools may have a higher population of families who are interested, and that may affect that homeschool differently. I think the reality is we don't know the answer to that question. We do want to make sure that there are clear on-ramps and off-ramps for families at the end of quarters, at the end of the semester, just to make sure that we're wrapping up instruction. And because the online courses, while aligned to South Carolina standards, are not going to follow the same curricular tools that we're going to use in traditional face-to-face instruction or hybrid instruction that's offered at the school level. So it's going to be easier for a student to transition at a natural transition point versus coming in the middle of the semester. And that allows us, I think, some planning time to make sure that we can be thoughtful about things like class size and safety, and making sure that everyone is in a good place. I think optimistically, my hope is if a family is choosing to return their child to school, we're in a better place around the virus transmission. I'm going to transition, but feel free if you have additional questions on this as we start to go through the presentation. I'd appreciate it, because I know this is important to a lot of families out in the county. The next piece is also, I know, really important. The idea that there's been some trauma, and it's back on the, thank you, the wraparound supports. Like, how do we think about what the school should do to recognize that there's trauma both for the shutdown and all that families are balancing, as Ms. Bush highlighted earlier, and the recognition that in the country right now, there's been a movement to make sure that we're curtailing police violence and making sure that we're tackling institutional racism. So in that environment, what makes school welcoming? How can we make kids connected to each other? Ms. Coker leads our alternative programs and has done a lot of thinking about this, and I'm gonna have her share where we are now.
Thank you, Carolyn. Good morning, everyone. And so we have a cross-department team working on all of these topics. It includes my department, as well as intervention and psych services, school counseling, and security and emergency management. And so having a cross-departmental approach is not new for us. We have an established crisis response model that we use that's nationally recognized called Prepare. And we are working through that model because we see the pandemic and the social justice issues as crises. And so in that model, the P stands for prevent and prepare for crisis. So obviously we're in the preparing for the return of our students in this crisis. The R stands for reaffirm, which is reaffirming physical health and wellness and the perceptions of safety and security. We all know that physical safety has to be ensured before we can get to kids' psychological safety. So that's an important step that we're working on now. And then there's an E, which is an evaluate the psychological trauma risk. And so that's the phase we're really in right now, trying to evaluate the levels of trauma and risk for our adults first, because we have to prepare them then to work with our students who will come back. And then how do we assess the risk of our students? And then next, after we evaluate that risk, would be providing intervention. So simultaneous while we're evaluating the risk, we're also working on our intervention models and support models for students. We have those naturally in place with our community partners, with Department of Mental Health and MUSC and some other partners that we use quite frequently, D. Norton. And then we have embedded supports with our psychologists and our social workers and our guidance counselors. So how do we make a system where we can support students in a more robust manner when we come back in the fall? That might mean looking at how people operate on a daily basis a little differently. And then of course the R stands for responding to those mental health needs, which is what I was just talking about. How do we ensure that once we know which students are at risk, that we have services for them? And then of course, as we go through, very often examining those processes and are we having enough outreach for the students. I'm happy to say we do have an embedded social emotional learning curriculum for 4K through 8th grade already established. And so our plan is to work with that group, which is Committee for Children, a nationally recognized organization. They're providing us resources for making sure that we can do this virtually or in person. We already have all of the videos for 4K to 5th grade, and we are actually working with them to produce 6th through 8th grade videos so that it doesn't matter if you're in person or not in person. We're working with our partners, the International Institute of Restorative Practices, to work on our listening circle process, which we use for adults and students, to tackle some of our racial and social issues. And so we have protocols we're developing and looking at developing a district level team to support schools in that process. As well as following guidance from some national organizations, like the National Association of School Psychologists have a lot of resources that we're tapping into at this time. But also continuing to support families. We will be starting the family support line has been in place since April. It's still operating right now. The call level is low, but we'll be manning that again soon in July, and continuing to offer our staff circles. We're having listening circles for staff care. And we're really gonna have to leverage our community partners to help with the staff piece. That's not something that we've traditionally focused a lot on. We've spent our time on students. So that's kind of where our thinking is right now and where our group is in our process.
Is there feedback on that approach or things you think we're missing that would be helpful for students and families?
Jennifer, I continue to be amazed at what you all are doing as a response to COVID, and so that sounds wonderful. I might have a resource that I could connect you with for the the adult side of things, so I'll just send you an email on that. But I think that work sounds amazing.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. We're going to move on to the next slide. We're trying to watch our time. We've used about half of our time talking about the instructional side of things. And we now would like to thank all of the Learning Services team, Carolyn, Jennifer, Michelle, Joe, for being with us this morning and participating by sharing who you are in this work. I find the people with whom I work tremendously impressive, and I hope that those of you who are joining the call can see how diligently we're working to try to make sure we have thought of everything that we can possibly do to support teachers, children, and families during these really challenging times. I think you'll see the same thing is true on the logistical side. Jeff, do you want to start by sharing your slides since first up is classroom design and installation? And if so, would you like Maggie to take these slides down so you can put yours up?
Let me go ahead and begin with the classroom design installation discussion bullets that are here, and then we'll launch into, if she can share the screen, I can put my pictures up on.
All right.
I love showing pictures. So first off, it is taking most of our time because it is the longest lean item as far as developing classroom space to maximize the number of kids that we can safely put in each classroom. We first began by developing a spacing criteria, both with and without dividers. That criteria was distributed to the schools so they can begin to look at it on their own. And we are trying to get out there in the field to each school. We've gotten through pretty much all the elementary schools at this point. We've done a full mock-up with dividers. We've done a number of different iterations with different types of desks, and we've begun to order the plexiglass to use for those dividers, and it makes a significant difference, especially at the elementary school level, to increase capacity without dividers to with dividers. It essentially doubles the number of kids that we can safely have in a classroom if, in fact, they can stay at their desks. That's obviously a key factor and will be a challenge for our schools. So if we can slip to the share screen, I can pop up mine real quick. I see it here. Let's see what I've got. And it's not showing right now. Give me a second here. Let me find it, if it'll clear out. There we go. Every time you move the cursor, it shows you another pop down here. All right, so this is an elementary school classroom, the general size of our newer classrooms. You can see we've got the desks in 4 student pods, and this shows a capacity of 24 students. We've got 6 of these setups here. The plexiglass dividers are cut and put into an X format, and we construct or attach them to a wooden post on each end. You can see that there is a difference in the way the desks are arranged, the one in the foreground and the rest of them. We call the foreground one the pinwheel, and that actually puts the students farther away from each other. If you look at one of the other layouts, if a child is sitting to their immediate side, to the right side, if you look at the one just beyond the rocking chair, the child can reach around the glass. In the setup in the foreground, they can't really reach to another student because of the way the desks are oriented. This is a close-up of that pinwheel desk. This is an early ed classroom. You can see the different style desks in this classroom, in which we've created the plexiglass dividers on the rectangle desk in the foreground, and the I don't even want to call the shape beyond that. The other shapes beyond that, again, an X that's put on the table, and we'll use a bead of silicone to secure that plexiglass to the table. Another example across the 4-person configuration. This is a picture of a high school classroom without dividers. We've maximized the placement of desks by positioning the back row against the wall. And you can't really tell, but the desks are in a triangle format, essentially to minimize or maximize the number of desks that we can put in here. The desk closest to the door would not actually be there. That's within 6 foot of the door. That desk would actually be where I'm standing when I took this photo. But for a high school classroom, generally, we believe we can get 16 to 17 students in there. In both elementary and high school, our initial calculation was 12. I mentioned on the elementaries, we can get probably 24. In a high school without dividers, 16 to 17. The plexiglass is the longest lean item. We have 5,000 sheets on order, and we have 10,000 in the queue. We might have been the first school district that we know of that got an order in, and we are quickly figuring out that other school districts are jumping on the bandwagon, the larger school districts, and we believe that we're in pretty good position to start receiving plexiglass next week. It will take the entire summer to complete this for the elementary schools that need the dividers. And then we're obviously looking at spaces in the middle and high schools to see if it would be helpful. We do have some middle and high schools with desks that are similar to elementary schools, in which we may be able to add dividers. And certainly for the specialty classrooms like science labs, where we would want to have dividers where we have fixed desks that can't be moved. We would want to put dividers between the students in classrooms like that. So we're well underway to move it out on this project. And it's going to be something that's going to take the whole summer. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing here. And if we can go back to the other slides, I can walk down through some of the other items that are on there. The next one below, classroom design is PPE. PPE is still subject to a lot of discussion, whether it be masks for everyone or masks for some in certain situations. We believe at this point that the supply line has caught up with the desire at this point, so I'm not that concerned about not having those in hand. Right now, we have enough masks for all staff members. We haven't ordered the children's masks at this point. Ellen Nitz is also spending a lot of time looking at face shields, finding a way to allow those to be used in lieu of masks for teachers. That makes things a lot more comfortable. Students can see the teacher's mouth moving, which is helpful, especially for our younger kids. Again, something we're researching very, very closely, but will be a decision that we will have to make before school opens related to who and who doesn't wear masks. Bus transportation, we've got word from the state that they're going to support 50% maximum capacity, which on an average bus yields us 36 students. That is the high end, because they've also reported that students cannot sit in the first 2 rows because of the bus driver, and so safety for the bus driver. And so in a lot of our schools, transportation at this point is the long pole in the tent and would limit the number of kids coming to school. We're looking at a lot of different options to increase capacity for as many schools as we can by either having a 3rd tier of buses officially or unofficially. So the official way to do it would be to change school bell times to create a 3rd line of scheduling. So we would run 3 in the morning, 3 in the afternoon instead of 2 and 2. That could create some earlier starts, and it could create some later starts as well as the finishes. So that would be very hard to do, but would increase our capacity by a 1/3. We're also looking at, if we keep with the 2 tiers, the 2nd tier having additional runs to get more kids to the 2nd tier schools. So analysis continues on that. Next one is cleaning and disinfection. Right now, the plan is that we will disinfect our touch surfaces and our bathrooms during the day, end of the day. Whole building fogging would occur once a week in a school. I have received some information from parents that are very concerned about materials, chemicals that we're using. And this is no different than the chemicals we've used in the past. We've been using the fogging chemical. We've been using the disinfecting chemicals in our schools, have been using them on a regular basis. It just may increase their frequency. We want to make sure that things are from a student perspective, and we believe that we can get there. The disinfection for the whole building is a great concept. Uses hydrogen peroxide. We have used those in high school locker rooms pretty much daily over the course of the time that I've been here. Fogging a school will make a positive difference, and there wouldn't be any safety issues with the kids coming in the following day. And we actually have enough disinfecting machines to do that at this point. We put in an order last month and have those rolling in now. Bus cleanliness, we would clean between the morning and afternoon runs, disinfection wise, and at the end of the day. Security for our schools, and these are some of the questions that are going to have to be finalized, and that's why they're in yellow. Visitor protocol, how we handle the building entrances. The consensus I've received so far from principals and teachers that I've talked to is they support minimizing people in schools. The only visitors would be essentially proctors that may be filling classrooms where teachers are rotating, or any other full-time needs that the schools have at this point. Lunch, nutrition services, lunch and breakfast. If it was up to me, I would want kids to come to the cafeteria, but I understand that there's a concern for having kids move to the cafeteria and wanting them to eat in classrooms, and that's something that will be subject to discussion. We can deliver meals to the classrooms, but that does increase our pest control needs, and that's fine. It does require us to pay for delivery and pickup of the trash. That's fine. We can deal with that. But I would also be interested, and we'll have to work through this with our schools. Will you let the kids out of class during the day? And this might be one opportunity for them to go to the cafeteria, pick up their meals, and come back to the classroom. That could increase their ability to stretch it out a little bit if we do it one classroom at a time. And also, I would still have the cleanup to do in the classrooms, but it may be something we'll consider. HVAC systems, let's talk about that a little bit. Two of the things that we've done is we've analyzed and studied and reviewed, tested all of our equipment in every school. Two things have come out of that. One is that we do want to try to do some filter upgrades. Every time you do a filter upgrade, although it does increase the capture of materials in the air, it does require additional replacement of those filters because the systems themselves will begin to experience some challenges and continue to operate if the filters become clogged. And the higher the filter number, the MERV number, the more frequent that has to be done to keep the systems operating. But we're looking at upgrading to, if you're familiar with it all, MERV 11 and MERV 13 filters for schools that don't have them at this point. MERV 13 captures 50% of viruses, and that would be optimal, but we do have some systems that we cannot get to MERV 13. In addition to that, we've analyzed all of our fresh air equipment. Keeping fresh air maximized into the school is a desire, and we've got funding in place and a plan in place to replace the equipment that's been identified for repair after looking at every single school. I've got a few more on the next slide, and then I'll open to questions and comments. Would love to get some feedback. We're in the process of upgrading our clinics. You can see the items listed there for our nurses and providing a safe environment for our students in the clinic. Technology, I've got two things with technology. One are the numbers of devices. We believe that we will have enough devices to, again, as we did in the spring, offer a device to every student. The second concern is Wi-Fi, and that is a twofold problem. One are the households that have the ability to have a Wi-Fi and don't have the ability to pay for Wi-Fi. And then you have certain parts of the county in the remote areas that don't have the ability to get Wi-Fi. And so the two things that we're doing, we have the state providing us, at this point, we've asked for 4,200 MiFi packs. So the MiFi is the device that they take home with their device and allows them to access using cellular service. Right now, it'll either be, I believe, AT&T and Verizon. And so we will provide them with a pack that provides the best connectivity in their home. And then we're also working with our internet companies to see about the delivery service, what they can do in the areas that don't have cell coverage. So twofold approach with that. The last four, I got 4 or 5 left on the list. Drinking water is a question. It's recommended by Accelerate Ed to secure drinking fountains and have water bottles used. So that's being looked at. One of the challenges we have is we still have 17 schools that don't have bottle fill stations. And so we're rapidly taking a look at that. We would want to have bottle fill stations at our schools that use water bottles across the board. Transitions inside the school, we talked about that with the cafeteria and food service a little bit. Classrooms, doors are open or closed related to security, and reducing touch surfaces is the opposite side of that scale. That's being looked at. Safety signage, Our initial order for safety signage for all schools is on order. We'll have that in mid-July, and we'll continue to assess where we need signage, and we'll continue to provide that where needed. And then there's the list of entry requirements that are question mark at this point. We want to do a health log. The question is, how do we do that? Temperature taking, whether that'll be required, and hand washing and hand sanitizer. We can't add sinks into classrooms that don't have them. We're obviously going to have hand sanitizer readily available, but for right now, do we need to do an initial hand washing when students come into school? And that'll be a challenge in itself as well. So a lot of information. I talked very fast, but I'd certainly love to hear your thoughts and feedback on any of these items at this point.
Hi, Jeff. It's Melissa Reese again. Who would have thought that 8 months ago the James Island bus lot was your biggest concern? So thank you for all that you have done.
Oh, sticking it to me. I see.
So
that's a good one.
Questions I had, I haven't really heard preschool and CD programs brought up, but I specifically work in the Montessori program. And so how the dividers or social distancing with kids who aren't just at tables, but also at mats look, just to kind of put that out there, and about cleaning the sinks in the bathrooms that are in the CD and early childhood classrooms.
Yeah, so on both of those, number one is if we haven't already, and I believe it was scheduled for this week, and I may not have gotten feedback on it, but we were going to do a Montessori mock-up at James Simmons, and the principals from those schools were planning on showing up to see that in action so they could suggest things as furniture was moved around. So the layout itself is being developed for Montessori, understanding it is very different. The cleaning of materials in those classrooms has not been decided yet. That's on our to-do list of, do we need to clean materials that are shared during the day? Right now, we weren't planning on it, but it's something that we at least have to have the answer of why we wouldn't do it and what risk it poses. So that's something to be determined. And as far as individual sinks in the classroom, the thought would be we would handle those just like we do bathrooms. They would be disinfected once during the day and once at night. Good questions. Good questions.
I have a question real quick, if I may. My name's Lauren. I'm a student, and I was wondering if classes like physical education and music would be waived because of the closeness and just learning that you're supposed to do in those classes.
Great question. As a trombone player, past and present, I don't want anybody sitting too close to me when I'm playing. But I will say that there is a lot of dialogue with our specialty programs. There is guidance being put out by the national associations related to chorus and band that we'll be taking a look at. One of the suggestions from the middle school principal was to make music appreciation the middle school class for the first semester, so we don't have to handle that aspect of it. Certainly that would be much harder to do in high school. But all three of those, music, chorus, and PE, are being closely looked at to figure out how we can safely do those. Clearly, there will be differences from what we see in a normal classroom. And I appreciate you bringing it up and know that that's on our list. And we probably ought to have it on this, on one of these slides as well, because that's something that's going to require some deep review and planning across the board. Thanks.
Jeff, I had a question for you. When you were talking about the HVAC systems across the district, you mentioned that there were some HVAC systems in the district that, correct me if I'm wrong here, that weren't like MERV certified or weren't aligned with MERV. Is the plan to get those aligned by the time school reopens, or what's the plan for those?
So the plan will be to take the existing equipment to the highest level that we can take it from a filter perspective. We believe that all of the equipment can get to a MERV 11 level. We know that not all of it can get to a MERV 13. If we were to replace the MERV 11s with new equipment, we just can't get there. It's a significant, it would be essentially replacing the entire unit. And we can't get to that anytime in the near future. It would take us until the next calendar year to make that happen. So our goal is to first get all of the systems to the highest level possible. But again, the lowest level we believe is MERV 11. Yep. And I will say that, you know, we're obviously in the process of completely replacing the system in your school. And that's still on track. Yeah. Yep. That was already planned and underway. All right. Might be ready to move on.
So, Mr. Kennedy, I saw you on the pictures a moment ago, I think. If Don Kennedy is still on, we will turn it over to Don to talk about the short and longer term impacts on revenue. Don?
Yes, he's still on. Good morning, everyone. Sorry, I didn't realize it was my time to come up. So at any rate, the school board two afternoons ago adopted and approved the fiscal 21 next year's general operating fund budget. We developed the budget, got it adopted without having all of the plans around COVID-19 reactivation, the school reactivation, without having all those plans solidified. So as the academic side of the house under Ms. Belcher and the operations side under Mr. Barori, as they finalize their plans, they feed that information over to my finance team. My finance team then begins to cost out what the financial implications are. So for instance, earlier this week on the virtual school, my team received the plans that the academic team has on those virtual school options. And so my team is working on the pricing on that now, the costing on that now. Last night I received from my team the information that the operations people under Jeff with the COVID-19 safety protocols. So as we get that information in, as the academic team finalizes this options, you know, we talk about the AB day or AB week or whatever that combination is. As we get that more finalized, then we will have the pricing on that. In terms of being able to fund those items in the budget that was just adopted 2 days ago, and we have a placeholder of $3.1 million. Of course, we have $13.4 million coming in from the federal government under the CARES funding. We have additional state revenues coming in. And then we also have categorical funds outside of the general operating fund that we're looking at as funding sources for these plans. And then in the fall, after the state adopts its fiscal 21 budget, we will take a revised budget back to our school board to reflect the additional or the updated state revenues that are coming in. So at this point, we are still trying to price and cost all of this out. Once we get that, again, solidified, the plans, that is, we'll have a dollar amount to take to the school board and work through that process. So that's on the short term. On the long term, right now we're looking at fiscal years 22 and 23, so 2 and 3 years out from the current budget that's coming up. So I do have some significant concerns there to help balance in the budget for fiscal year 21, as well as to maintain our investments in the students that need additional supports. We were able to tap into our fund balance. So the district is in a strong financial position because of the increase in fund balance over the last 3 or 4 years. And so we're able to use that those funds. In addition, we reduced spending in the current fiscal year, the spring, by $10.7 million. So we use that 10.7 to roll into next year's budget to support these efforts. Those 2 funding sources, the use of fund balance and the savings from the current fiscal year, are one-time, non-recurring revenue sources. So as we get into the out years, fiscal years 22 and 23, becomes a challenge to be able to replace those one-time funding sources. As early as a month ago, I was more optimistic than I am now and that was when the economy was reopening. But now that we're hearing that we're at a high risk area, there's a great fear that the economic recovery will not occur as quickly as we thought it might have a month ago. And so that will put added challenges on our ability to maintain our investments as we go forward over the next two or 3 years. So that's the update, and as we get more solid financial numbers, I'll report those out.
Thanks, Don. Are there any questions for Don about the budget? It's really, all of this is massively complex. We could not have had a better chief financial officer leading our efforts during these times. So if you have any questions I'd like to ask about budget, this would be a good time to pose them.
Hi, Don. Melissa Reese here. My question is just because I've been getting, since the board meeting the other night, just from lots of teachers, we have no problem, we understand the financial situation, no COLA, no step raise, but a lot of them are asking if like the no COLA is across the board for all the district employees at 75 Calhoun as well.
Yes, and so in the budget, we have a placeholder for a teacher step increase if in the fall, when the state adopts this budget, if the state authorizes a step increase for teachers, then we will retroactively implement that step increase back to July 1. The only other category of employees that has a potential increase in salary is are the hourly employees that have been, when they come into the district, they have prior years of experience working in another district. Say, for instance, up at Berkeley High School, if you have a teacher assistant there that has, say, 20 years of work experience in Berkeley, and they transfer to Charleston County School District, and instead of us giving them, this occurred, I'm not sure, a number of years ago, but instead of us giving them 20 years worth of experience at a pay level, we capped that at 12. And so we have a phased-in approach that would take that up to 15 years in this current in the current budget that was approved, only if the teachers receive their step increases. But other than that, there are no other salary increases anywhere in the district.
Any other questions about the budget, or have you thought of anything you wanted to ask Mr. Barowie about the operations side, the facilities and logistics? Jeff, I don't know that I took a moment to thank you for all you've done. I certainly want to make sure that we acknowledge the yeoman's work you and the facilities group has done. They were, I think, probably the first in our state to think about an innovative solution of the plexiglass dividers, and that has taken off like wildfire now. And as Jeff said, there's a run on plexiglass or flexiglass, and we're hopeful that fabrication can occur and we can be ready just as quickly as it's safe to bring children back to school under any circumstance. That brings us to this next line, excuse me, about health testing for staff and students.
Dr. P, we have a...
Go ahead, Michelle.
Ms. McIntosh was raising her hand.
Thanks. Thank you, Ms. Simmons. Just a quick question or confirmation for Mr. Kennedy. It's my understanding that the CARES Act can be, some of the funding can be allocated for salaries. Can the district confirm that? And if so, what percentage right now, or is the district looking at setting aside, or are we just still waiting on what Columbia decides before we can move forward with the CARES Act funding?
So the CARES Act funding, there are 12 categories in which funding can be used. We've received directions from the state already. It's an application process, so we have to develop a plan, submit an application to the state, and then so in that application, it have to lay out within those 12 categories exactly where we plan on spending. fund. So we currently have a team here in the district that's consistent of people on my staff, as well as the academic side and the special revenue side of the house. And what we're doing now is taking a look at those 12 categories, taking a look at what's needed in the district and where it be most appropriate to apply that 13.4 million. And so we have not finalized that yet. Part of that also is trying to is working with our private schools here in the local area, because they are authorized a certain portion of that. And so those plans have been developed, and within those plans, there would be a combination of potentially staff, which would be salaries, of course, plus non-salary type expenditures. But we have not finalized that yet.
If we did add staff, Ms. McIntosh, my sense is it's going to be related to things like staffing the K-12 online program. So things that we have to do as an additional requirement to cover COVID, or to have additional bodies on campuses in order to cover kids in a variety of different classrooms. So that's the way that we're thinking about it as we start to put together some of these plans.
Any other questions? I'm going to move on into health testing for staff and students. And over in the comments or recommendation column, you see we have require versus, excuse me, strongly recommend. And our thinking right now is that we will strongly recommend and work with our local health providers to offer lots of opportunities for our students and all of our staff members to be screened for COVID-19 before they come back to work. We know that that's just one snapshot. We think it would be an extra precautionary safety measure that we could take to make sure that we're not starting school with COVID-19 individuals when we could have taken steps to make it. We think that it would not be wise to try to require that all students and staff get tested. Although we would like to do that, we don't think that's practical. So we're going to highly encourage, recommend, provide as many opportunities as our local partners can help support in multiple sites throughout the district. Do you have any thoughts about that particular item?
This is Melissa Reese again, sorry. Right now I'm 8 months pregnant, so I will not be starting the school year in the building. And I know for me, like coming back, or the idea of being around lots of people with a newborn, it's just that little tiny peace of mind, whether it's just for a week or 2 weeks. So I would say strongly recommend. I don't know if you can require it, but if you have the opportunity, like I'm at work and you can just do it while I'm there or whatever, I can go down the road. It just does give an extra peace of mind to parents and families. So
thank you.
Yeah, this is Sherry. I think it would be a logistical nightmare to test everyone. However, I do think installing those thermometers where folks could either, step to it and it tells you your temperature every day or something like that, I think is definitely reasonable for everyone that enters a building.
Thank you, Sherry and Melissa. Jeff, do you want to comment on the experimentation you are doing with the thermometers?
So we've procured and have in stock and are using the forehead thermometers that requires an individual to put the thermometer up to the person's forehead. It's a no-touch read. So those are being used by a number of our staff that are on the front lines, as well as those in athletics right now. We feel very comfortable with that. However, obviously doing that for every child coming in the door and every faculty member coming in the door every day is going to be extremely difficult. I know some other school districts have looked at random testing along those lines, but that's something that'll have to be reviewed and finalized here this summer. The automatic device, either a kiosk style, standalone pedestal, or a wall-mounted iPad-looking device. Those are available. We have one installed and being used to see how effective it is. The challenge with those is that is quite frankly the cost. They're in the thousands of dollars, and if we have to put at least one in every school, that's a pretty significant investment. And when you look at all of the criteria for COVID, it is but one small item. So the question is, how truly effective would it be? Yes, it's an indicator, but it's a question of whether we want to go that far or not. So it is being looked at. I appreciate the thought about using that. It does make it easier because nobody has to hold on to it, but we're still cycling everybody through it if we had those. So
thank you. Thanks. And that probably leads me to the point of mentioning 2 points. I want to tell you where our thinking currently is with respect to students wearing masks. We know that there are children with health challenges who should wear masks. And so my comments don't apply to those children who have specific health conditions that would make wearing masks problematic. But we are thinking that from the time a child gets on the school bus, that they should have a face covering of some sort, a mask or scarf around their faces. We are not permitted to put plexiglass dividers or even clear shower curtains to protect bus drivers. So as a student steps onto the bus, we think they should have a mask on. When they are properly seated in their assigned seat, they could take the mask off. They would need to put it back on again before they get off the bus. From the time children step foot on the school property to begin to enter the school, they need to be wearing a mask. They need to keep the mask on until they are in their classroom at their seat, and then they can take the mask off. If you just think about what Jeff said about hoping that children can walk to the lunchroom to pick up their lunch, it would not be possible to get hundreds and in some cases more than 1,000 students through lunch lines, keeping a 6-foot distance. We would have to start serving lunch at about 8:30 a.m. when you start doing the math on that. So in times like that, or when they get to go to the restroom, or the whole class is going to a different location in the building, they would need to wear their masks again until they're seated where they are physically distanced in what we believe to be a safe way. This is a recommendation we continue to discuss. We will need to take this and many other aspects of this plan to our board on July 20th. But I did want to mention where our current thinking is about the masks. Any comments or reflections about that?
Will the face mask ordinance in the city of Charleston affect this?
Frankly, I don't know the answer to that. It was just last night, and I doubt we've had a chance to take a look at what it requires. One would think that the aspects that apply would apply to public schools. I don't know how that might impact our practice. I can't think it would cause us to exceed what we're currently recommending.
Hi, Chad Williams.
Chad?
I'm an 8th grade math teacher at Deer Park Middle, and I just have a question. I guess the inevitability that I'm worried about is there's probably going to be some positive tests of students over the course of the year. And I have 2 of my young kids are both in daycare right now, and we just had 2 parents confirm cases. And I am really apprehensive now to send them back at any point soon. And I guess do we have access to be able to test people to come back into school? Because if I could test my family and my kids, I go, okay, I feel safe now that I can send my particular kids back and we're okay. But I know that families would be really apprehensive. Like once that first positive test hits, they're gonna pull back and may not want to come back unless there's some sort of protocol in place.
We will have protocols in place, and I will answer the question generally, and perhaps Ellen Nitz, our Director of Nursing Services, would want to weigh in here. But the other thing I wanted to mention to you is that the school district is working with MUSC. MUSC has developed a back to business that helps a business review the protocols to see if they are aligned with the recommendations of the medical experts. And they're going to work with us to develop what I will call a back to school playbook. They're on site on 3 different sites that we have set up, walk the buildings with us, go through the physical distancing that we have in place, the movement protocols that we've put in place, and they will also advise us on how to handle the kinds of situations that you've just referred to. We will follow that advice. I'm not sure whether Dr. Sweat from MUSC is on today's call or not. If there's someone from MUSC on the call, you may want to speak up about what we're trying to do together. We have a conversation to discuss the details more on Monday, but I'd like to give them an opportunity to weigh in if they're on the call. We are getting on a group call with 4 experts from MUSC on Monday to work out details. Again, it's almost like creating a good housekeeping seal of approval for school district reopening. So we definitely will do 3 schools and with them, and then either ask them to help us with the remainder of the 80-some schools, or create our own team that's trained to conduct these screening audits to ensure that we have the right kinds of practices and responses in place. Ellen, do you want to say something about the difficulty? We will offer the COVID testing along with the partners, Feder, Roper St. Francis, MUSC have been just amazing partners throughout this whole process and continue to increase the screening opportunities that they're providing to communities and to us. But there are difficulties knowing how many times you need to test throughout that incubation period.
Yes, that's all correct, Dr. Postaway. And so what we are doing with the screening is we're using that as an identification tool for that snapshot of time. And we are seeing that we are actually finding some cases of asymptomatic people that are turning up positive. And by doing the test and putting those people in isolation, we are actually able to prevent further transmission on the front end. And so that's why the, strongly recommended is going to be so highly encouraged, for all of our staff and some of our students that want to participate as well. But, and then, not only working with MUSC back to business or back to school plan that, that we are utilizing, we continue our partnership with DHEC and looking towards CDC for further guidance and making sure that we are constantly staying up to date with all of their guidelines as well. So as everyone knows with COVID-19, it's a very fluid situation. It can change, things can change overnight, but we have that consistency of communications with many different partners to make sure that we're staying up to date.
Thank you, Ellen. And I should have called out Dr. Richardson with the DHEC as well. She's been just spectacular in terms of working very closely with Ellen and our team. The board chair and vice chair were on the call at the beginning. I don't know if they were able to stay on the entire time, but if they were, Reverend Mack or Mrs. Darby, do you want to say anything before we turn over to communications team to close out the meeting?
Dr. Postaway, the only thing I want to add is that, of course, this work has been a task set before us that we need to accomplish in order to set safe standards and trying in preparation opening up schools. Your Staff has done an amazing job, I have to say, and I tip my hats off to Don, to Jeff, to Carol, and their staff, Joe and Michelle, and to the parents that's on this call, the community at large, the teachers and the student, because it's going to take all of us to try to find the best and the safest way to enter back into school, and to do it with keeping everyone in mind on how we do this. And I just can't say thank you enough to everyone that's on this call, because believe it or not, you all play a major role in how we safely re-enter into schools. And I just want to say thank you so much for helping us to be able to make best practice decisions, health component wise, moving forward. And we can't do this work without all of you being a part of it. So thank you so much, and especially to our medical staff and to DHAC, who also gives us a lot of information and a lot of guidance. We thank you so much for all that you're doing as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Darby? She may have had to step off the call. So Erica, I'm going to turn it back over to you and the communications team to close out the meeting. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Postlewaite. And I would just offer, just in terms of communication, we know that it must be consistent and deliberate and strategic, and that's what the communications team, what we are, the mindset that we have as we move forward. It's important for us to have two-way communication between our parents and leaders in the school and teachers and the community at large, to ensure that you all know and everyone knows that we are deliberate in ensuring that you know that we have our students and those who work for the district's best interests at heart. And so some of the unique strategies that we've decided to employ, of course, include Q&As, but also we're in the process of producing some videos so that parents feel comfortable in knowing, depending upon what strategy we use for students to go back to school, what that looks like, what it looks like when a student gets on a bus, gets off of a bus, what it looks like when they traverse down the halls in their schools and in their classrooms. And so we thought it was important for parents to see what it would look like. And so we're in the process of producing those videos. But at the end of the day, we want to instill confidence in everyone that we are doing what we know is the right thing to do for all students. And so with that, I want to thank everyone on this call for spending part of their morning with us. If there are any questions or comments that come up that you think about after we get off, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Dr. Postlewaite or any of the other leaders who presented to you all today to offer suggestions and ideas. We are going to get through this together, and I just want to thank everyone for the part that they're doing in making sure that it happens for the students that we serve. And so with that, I want to say thank you and wish that you all have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care. You all have a great day and stay well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.